And that's what's brilliant when you go to like Starry Night, which I love Starry Night. I know that's like so stereotypical of like, of course you love Starry Night. It's fine. I love it. In the middle of the painting, if you pay attention, there is a church with no lights on. And that's just so, I feel like that's so intentional. And when you see like the sky lit up with these brilliant yellows representing the divine, even some of the houses down below have the lights on with the yellow windows, but the church, there's no lights on. And it's like just pointing to this whole, like he saw the divine up above, all around us. And he felt as though the church was really failing to show the light of God.
Go. All right, I'm just going to jump into this and then hopefully it sounds good.
Yeah, I mean, it's editor problems,
I just chat GPT this whole intro here. I was like, give me these parameters and like this is what it's about. Like, give me a quick little like intro.
Yeah, like it might be awful at image making, but I feel like it's pretty good at like helping you structure thoughts that you already had.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a tool that can be used poorly, and even our resources for it right now, I don't love how we're using so much energy and power for it. But I'm like, there's a lot of things that I feel that way about, like our cars, and I use my car, and I just want us to find better ways of doing things, and I don't feel the need to boycott everything until we make it perfect,
Yeah.
That's just me. Sorry. That's not what our podcast is about.
No, that's all right. I know a lot of people are boycotting ChatGPT right now because the owner has been the biggest contributor to the Trump campaign by far. So.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Well, so I think those things don't bother me. I'm like, that boycott makes sense. The ones that bother me, sorry, I'm like, in my heart, I'm a Republican. I just don't believe Republicans exist anymore.
No.
Like, put in the, like, yeah, real, you know what I mean?
Very small.
Yeah. Yeah, like, it's just very few, far between. David French, I love. I disagree with him on some stuff still, but it's like, at least, I'm like, there's one guy out there who still is like,
at least one guy.
Yeah, there's one. And I believe in him. It drives me crazy how many Democrat leaders and stuff, or people I know who are like very passionate about the Democratic Party, are like boycotting ChatGPT because it uses all this energy and AI is terrible. And I'm like, where'd you find the research for all this? We Googled it. Every single Google search uses AI, right? Like all of them.
I mean, you got to use
Google does its algorithms is AI.
Yeah, still, yeah, it's like we're as resistance, you're forced to use the tools of the oppressor. It's sad, but
which can tie nicely into Van Gogh, because Van Gogh's view of the divine and where he wanted the church to care about missions, he very much pushed up against institutional church, but he also tried to do it from within for a while, right? Like he tried to be a pastor, and it just didn't pan out because he's like, yeah, I want the church to work, but not like this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love Van Gogh. I'm ready for this.
Well, we'll talk about all that. Why don't I jump off here? All right, so when you hear the name Vincent van Gogh, or Vincent van Gogh, as I said in Europe, you probably think of swirling skies, blazing sunflowers, and yes, the ear. History really latched on to that one. But Van Gogh was more than a tragic genius with a paintbrush. He was the son of a pastor, a would-be preacher himself, and a man obsessed not just with what he saw, but what it meant. Before he painted masterpieces, Vincent tried to save souls. He studied theology, preached to minors, and wrestled with faith, suffering, and purpose. Those questions never left him. They just swapped pulpits for easels. His sermons became color, electric blues, blazing yellows, and starry skies that feel less like landscapes and more like prayers in motion. I'm Mark Flower, and I have someone with me who should really be considered a regular at this point, Joshua Noel. Thanks for joining me on that.
I would like to be a regular. Thanks for having me on. I love this. I love Van Gogh. I love this podcast. And I love you, Mark. You're awesome. And thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Love you too, man. So yeah, we're going to be jumping into Van Gogh, or Van Gogh, like I said, as they pronounce in Europe. So we might be jumping back and forth, but that's who we're talking about today. You brought this up, what was it, like half a year, like 6 months ago? Something like that, like August or so last year. You said you wanted to do it, and then we just kept pushing it off, and now here we are. You had some like insights that you really wanted to talk to about Van Gogh. At the time when you brought it up, I thought, cool, I love art. I was thinking we'd be talking about painting and whatnot, but then you brought up some things, and I was like, man, he's a much deeper conversation than I thought he was. I was thinking more surface level. But then looking into it myself, like I just I didn't realize a lot of the stuff about Vincent van Gogh and about his life and about the depth of his theology and his ideology beyond just the painter himself. So I thought it was really cool that you brought this up, and I'm really thankful that you did, because I've been learning a ton.
Yeah. It's crazy. For a long time, I didn't want to lean into this at all, because I started liking Van Gogh because of an episode of Doctor Who. And I'm like, I feel like that's a terrible reason to like an artist. It makes me just like, cringe all over. But like, it really was. It was because there was an episode, even it was with Matt Smith, which is my least favorite Doctor, but it's one of my favorite episodes of Doctor Who, where they go and see Van Gogh. And like, that episode's all about mental health. And I liked seeing the mental health, the struggle, and then also seeing how he used colors, how he was somebody who was looked down on as an artist, who history has remembered him way more fondly than he was in his own time. And I'm like, just everything about his story, I loved it. And in last year, the year before, something like that, I've read other stuff by Skye Jethani, but I hadn't read The Divine Commodity until somewhat recently, which is one of his bigger books. In it, he talks a lot about Van Gogh's story as a pastor, as a missionary, all this stuff. And I was like, whoa, this guy's actually really freaking cool. Then I started doing research. I was like, you know who else I know who likes to go on random rabbit holes like this? Mark Flower. So I was like, Mark, we got to do something. Also, side note, I did get The Divine Commodity. I love that book so much. I ended up getting it from my dad. It's not more as much as like a progressive theology. Skye Jethani's a little more conservative, but he's like the conservative that understands that Donald Trump is evil, which to me is like the forgiving kind. I accept my brothers and sisters who are conservative, who understand that, or that his actions are evil, however you want to word it. So anyway, I like him a lot. I think his takes are really nuanced. He's probably more middle of the road leaning conservative theology wise than other things, but I ended up getting that book from my dad, The Divine Commodity. It's so well done. And just, if you don't mind me setting the stage with that book, because I think it's really a good jumping off point for a lot of this conversation. What Skye Jethani talks about in The Divine Commodity is how our church has modeled a lot of what's happening in our culture. And he's more talking about brand than commodity, but I guess, Divine Commodity sounds like divine comedy, so it sounds better. But he's really talking about brands and how like people see an apple on your Apple computer. They know what it is. And then churches started doing that same thing. We have a brand, we have a logo, we have it nicely packaged, and it's no longer challenging in a way. And then he talks about Van Gogh's story and how Van Gogh would often talk about how like the institutional church tries to like package it and make faith like a structured, here's what you do kind of thing. And Van Gogh said, no, I actually see God way more in nature, in the sky and the stars and color than I do in these institutions. And he uses Van Gogh's story to kind of say, this is what's happening today. A lot of people in our culture are spiritual but not religious. You'll hear that phrase a lot. And he says what's really happening is they're seeing our churches as this structured, packaged thing, and they don't see the divine in that. They don't see anything hopeful or inspiring there. But they do see this idea of spirituality out in nature, out in the sky, out in stars. There's something when we look up at the sky that makes us realize maybe there is more. So that's why a lot of people in our culture are spiritual but not religious. And he points to Van Gogh and be like, that was his experience. And the way that he reached out to people in the world was through his paintings to show where the divine really is. And that's when I started, like, that whole framework got me really into it. And I think it's a good place to start our conversation, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
I want to give you your show.
I think that actually ties in really nice with this first little conversation starter that I'd written down. I know initially how I'd written it, you told me, how am I supposed to answer this? And then I added a little bit more on there, and I think it actually works in with what you just said a little bit. So I'm just going to go ahead and say what I wrote down here. Van Gogh's father, somewhat of a theological liberal, followed a school of what was known as Groningen theology. So Groningen theology. This was a theological movement in the Dutch Reformed Church of the mid-19th century that sought a middle way between theological rationalism and orthodox Calvinism. One of the innovators of the Groningen theology, Hofstede de Groot, said the basic thought form that controls everything is this: that the foremost thing about Christianity is the revelation and education that God grants us in Jesus Christ in order to bring us into greater conformity with God. And so my question was, how do you suppose this may have impacted Vincent's worldview, theology, and ultimately his art? But like you were saying, like I wanted to also bring it into how this would contrast and compare to like theology today, especially with like liberal theologies and even conservative theologies. I specifically put like liberation theologies and like open and relational theologies and stuff like that. Do you have any thought as far as like how this may have impacted Vincent, as well as how that contrasts to what we see today in theology?
Yeah, It's a little hard not actually knowing that theology camp that his dad was a part of too well. So a little bit I'm talking out of my ass. So let me start there. And also, I'm not a Van Gogh expert. I'm just someone who's really passionate, loved what I've been researching. And I'm like, this guy's so cool. And I just had to get it out of my system. So we talk on podcast and maybe waste people's time or maybe inspire someone else to go on a rabbit hole like I've gone on and be inspired like I am. My wife does that, like we're at TJ Maxx, like they have all the like reprint paintings. So our house is like Van Gogh and like a few other ones. And without fail, without even me knowing who it is, anytime she brings one home and I'm like, oh, I love that one, it always is Van Gogh, like every time. So it's like, I'm not an expert. I just do happen to really like this guy for some reason. But thinking of like the theology stuff, talking out my ass, what I do know, what I wanted to bring up, Van Gogh, he had a really unique thing. When he tried to be a lay minister or pastor, he wasn't renewed because the church did not like his way of doing things. He was a little... it's hard to tell if he was being self-deprecating or if he was taking parts of what the church said really extreme. Mind you, a lot of other church fathers, and I can't think of their names or exactly who it is off the top of my head, so I'm just going to say church fathers and be ambiguous, and I'm sorry, guys. But in the past, it has been pretty frequent where church fathers or different, monks and stuff have given up all their possessions and lived a life poor so that they'd be closer to God. Like, that's not a radical thing, really. Like, historically, it's been done a lot. Van Gogh was seeing how missionaries were working in his time, and they were living these, like, not bougie lives, but they had money, right? Like, they were living well, and then going out and, like, telling people, you better love Jesus kind of things. Like, what a lot of times what we see evangelism. I'm going to do a little... I won't say the organization's name, but I'm going to do a little tattletelling. An organization I was close to growing up, we had these people come speaking, and they were like, I'm a missionary of insert country here, right? I found out later in life, like, I was like, oh, that's so cool. I love the church ever since they came, and I heard how they're helping people. Later in life, I found out that those people, what was happening in that organization, I don't know if it's every organization, they would be labeled the overseer of, I'm just going to say country X. We'll say Latveria. We're going to go Dr. Doom on everybody.
There you go.
They'll be, they come to your church saying, I'm a missionary, I'm in Latveria, it's a terrible place, Dr. Doom's persecuting everyone, but we're saying the word of God. And you're like, oh, that looks great, they have slides, and you're like, yeah, and then you're going to give money, and you're going to support them, and it's great. What was actually happening is the organization, the Church of S.H.I.E.L.D., was sending these people and making them the overseer of Latveria. So on paper, they're the overseer of Latveria. When they go to your church, they're saying they're a missionary. And what the overseer did is they had a nice house. Usually it was gated off, so the people of Latveria couldn't get to them. They were getting your money. They were getting money from the organization at the same time. And they were living really nice lives. And yeah, they were still preaching and going out to people, but they weren't really living with the people. Mm-hmm. And when I found that out, that was one of the things that really just hurt me about some of the churches I grew up with. This is similar to what Van Gogh saw. He was seeing these people living really well and going out and preaching to people. And he's like, hell no. What Van Gogh did is he sold all of his stuff. He would sleep in the floor so that he was close to the ground like the coal workers were that he was trying to minister to. And that's why they gave him the nickname, the Christ of the coal mine. Because he was like, no, if I'm ministering to people who are sleeping on dirt, guess what? I'm sleeping in dirt too, man. And the church did not like that. They thought it was really radical, and he ended up getting kicked out. Knowing what we know about his possible suicide and everything, it's really hard to go through the history and figure out what's what. Like, was he being self-deprecating? Or was this like a genuine sense of like, this is how mission work should be done? Mm-hmm. I say all that to say, I think liberation theology is close to that, right? We're going to be in there with the people. We are shackled, but we know that God wants us to be free. That I think is really close to liberation theology. But when you think of like how his dad's theology, from my understanding, has a lot of influence in Calvinism and different things like that, I don't think it's going to be very close to open and relational theology. But I also seen Van Gogh. He wants to imitate Christ. I think that was the focus. That was the focus of his dad's theology. So I think if you were to press him, he'd probably say a lot of stuff about predestination maybe, or like, stuff like God being over you if you really pressed him. But I don't think that's where his focus was. Like, I think he was more focused on how do I be Christ to people? How do we liberate people? And that's awesome. And the problem is you also get this mental health stuff mixed up, and you're like, I'm not sure where is it self-deprivation and him wanting, or where is it him wanting to be with people and trying to liberate people? It's a little fuzzy looking back.
We can talk about why potential reasons why he had mental health issues, something to do with the paints. I can bring that up later. I'm sure you've come across that, but
yeah, there's lots of theories.
Yeah, I really enjoyed learning about him and like his upbringing, where his dad was from, and he veered a little bit away from it, where his dad had more of this kind of liberal approach. He veered more towards this like born again Christianity, more of a conservative kind of side of Christianity. But still, like his like moral arc of his life kind of brought him into this, like you were describing, like how it's very close to like liberation theology, like living with the people, kind of seeing their struggle and their things that they're going through and wants to live with them, almost taking on this very Christ-like approach, kind of like what his father would actually, kind of be going towards with this. Everything is kind of Christ-centered, Christ-focused. God instructs us through Christ the Redeemer, and that's how it educates us and instructs us how to find conformity within God. So I thought it was this kind of cool, very like nuanced and very complex like thing that Van Gogh had been working through his life, instead of just accepting like, this is the way I see religion, this is the way I see God, this is the way I see the Bible, and how to work that in our world, in our life. It's that he was constantly asking these questions, almost deconstructing, if you could, his philosophy and theology around everything, and how he saw the world and how he interacted with it. So I thought it was really cool, like just like what you were describing with all this.
Yeah. Sorry. Do you know Colleen Shindrick? Do you know her by chance?
Who is it?
Oh, well, she does open and relational theology. She is the founder of, I'm trying to think of what it's called, NRI, the Neural Relational Integration Leadership Model. Really cool person. She goes to Theology Beer Camp. So if you haven't met her, I'll introduce you next year, hopefully.
What was her name again?
Shalene Kendrick.
I might follow her on social media, but yeah.
She's cool. But I think I can call her a friend now. I think they're probably safe. But she's really cool. But no, she talks a lot about, like, in her work, how they've actually proven how a lot of these theological structures that are close to like Calvinism and that kind of like model actually has been harmful to people's mental health. So like when I think of like all the different theories of like Van Gogh, I do kind of wonder, like, is it possible that the parts of the theology he inherited that were more toxic about like who God was, that could have played a part? Because like all of what he's doing is wanting to imitate Christ, wanting to be more liberation focused. But if his actual doctrine was still harmful, that could have contributed. The paint thing you mentioned could contribute. Like, and also there's a chance that he was not as unstable as we thought, and it was just everybody wanted to paint him that way so that they didn't have to listen to him. So it's a little bit of like, who knows?
Yeah, and you have to address that he has made like anti-Semitic remarks in the past, when like his conversations with Gauguin. I think he talks about, I don't even to say what he said, but he has made anti-Semitic remarks to like Gauguin through like letters and whatnot and that kind of thing. So I think some of that old like ingrained theology that he learned as a child, I don't know if it was from his father, but just maybe from the community, from the society at large, that's just the sentiment that was at the time, but some of that did come through his life. So it's like you see these beautiful moments, but you also have to acknowledge some of the darker sides as well. Then the mental health is one of the big issues, and like how does that play in? Like, was it really mental health? Just like at Eternity's Gate, like the kids, throwing all his paints all over the place and saying he's a monster, but is that really who he was, or was he just kind of painted that way? Pun intended.
Yeah. I mean, it's complex, and as now a Lutheran, I have the same thing with like Martin Luther. Like there's some phrases like, he was by no means a process theologian, but that whole we are in a process of becoming, that comes from Martin Luther. So like, I'm like, oh, he's awesome. But then also he had a lot of anti-Semitic things. And I'm like, that's not as awesome. And I'm sure if we saw the Lutheran Church today, there'd be some stuff. He's like, yeah, you guys got that faith, salvation by faith stuff down. And then he'd be like, what do you mean we're gay affirming now? Like I think he'd probably be a little mixed reaction to the Lutheran Church.
Oh, yeah. But
yeah, I don't know, man. Van Gogh is just so interesting. And it is like, I think to an extent he was trying to shake the shackles of his time. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to do that because all of us are in some way a product of our time, even if maybe we have good hearts, we're more well-intended. I just don't think it's possible to completely shake, which is where I'm like, our Orthodox brothers and sisters, their beliefs of how they interpret instead of original sin, I really like that model because I'm sure you might be familiar, I don't know. But someone probably isn't. Orthodox belief, instead of having like inherited sin where like Adam sinned, so now we all inherit sin by being born, it's more like sin creates these systems where it's really hard to be born into systems of sin and not sin. And it's like that systemic idea is like how the Orthodox have understood our need of salvation, and I'm like, I like that. Like, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's how I view Van Gogh's life, I think, is like a lot of his stuff, man. that was an incredible man who had a heart after God, like the Christ of the coal mine story. Dude, I love that guy. But like, if he had mental health issues, man, he was born in a terrible time to have mental health issues, right? And even like the anti-Semitic stuff and everything, I'm like, I do not want to excuse that. Like, that is still awful. But I also understand that it's like, yeah, when we're born into these systems of sin, it's hard not to fall into it. And it's like, I'm sure 100 years from now, someone's going to look back, if they happen to remember either of us, and be like, I can't believe that they thought, something. There's always something that we look back. I just hope that we continue to progress as a humanity.
Yeah, I hope so too. Why don't I move on to the second little bit that I had going on? I know we already talked about some of this, but I'm going to talk a little bit about his kind of life leading up to becoming a painter. So Vincent van Gogh, aside from being an immensely influential painter, was a pastor for a time. He fancied the born-again conservative Christianity while working for an art dealer in London. He followed in his father's footsteps by desiring to become a pastor. However, that didn't pan out the way he thought, as he was rejected by the Dutch Reformed Church for failing to master biblical Greek. He was commissioned by the Belgian Missionary Society as a missionary preacher, then was later sent to pastor a Belgian coal mining community. Vincent thought it was antithetical to the Gospels to dress fancy and live in a luxurious home while ministering to poor coal miners. So he lived amongst the people there. The Belgian Missionary Society wasn't happy with his praxis or application of impoverished lifestyle. So after numerous rebukes, they ceased his funding. After continuing independently and also being refused by the Methodist Church, his savings ran out, which forced him to seek out alternative sources of income. This is where most stories of him pick up. The starving, brilliant artist supported by his brother, Theo. Disillusioned by the institutionalized Christianity, Van Gogh searched for faith from those who also disenchanted with the church. He found weight in the writings of theologian Ernest Renan, who stressed the importance of being Christ-like in humility and servitude. Van Gogh's paintings reflected his spirituality though he largely rejected the use of traditional Christian imagery. The exceptions, of course, happening late in his life with the paintings The Raising of Lazarus, Pieta, and The Good Samaritan. He used color as symbol of his spirituality. So my question was, how have you come to recognize this symbolism through his art? So specifically looking at color and his use of different like motifs and whatnot through his paintings.
Yeah, so Van Gogh subscribed to what was called color theory, of having the contrast colors put together makes them look more vibrant. So if he had a yellow, he was going to try and use like a purple or blue or something like that. If red, he's going to try and use like a green to really make the color stand out. Yellow was his favorite color, which is great because that's my favorite color. But unfortunately, I just don't look good in yellow, which makes me sad, but it's fine. But no, like to him, yellow stood for the divine. It stood for hope, inspiration, these more positive things. Red was kind of like the color of humanity, the passions. Blue is kind of, I forget what blue was. I'm sorry. But so you have like a couple things going on where like he has the symbolism of like what the colors mean, as well as this color theory of like wanting to have that contrast, which is why it's always fun when you see like the yellows and reds together, because in Van Gogh's mind, he's trying to contrast them so they stand out more. The yellow is representing like what he feels is the divine, and then the red is what he's humanity. And immediately there's just something very Christ-like about that, of like seeing those contrasts together and like understanding where his thought is with it. And like he would often say that he saw the divine out in the skies, like out in nature, not necessarily in the institutions. And that's what's brilliant when you go to like Starry Night, which I love Starry Night. I know that's like so stereotypical of like, of course you live during, it's fine. I love it. In the middle of the painting, if you pay attention, there is a church with no lights on. And it's just so, I feel like that's so intentional. And when you see like the sky lit up with these brilliant yellows representing the divine, even some of the houses down below have the lights on with the yellow windows, but the church, there's no lights on. And it's like just pointing to this whole, like he saw the divine up above, all around us. And he felt as though the church was really failing to show the light of God. And like you see that in so many of even like the sunflower fields. Some of my favorite ones is like he'll have one side that's like all red flowers and the other side's all the yellow. And I'm like, humanity, the divine together. And I'm like, it's just brilliant, man. And even like he was considered, let me make sure I have my terms right, a post-impressionist artist, right? Like that was his art style. Mm-hmm. But also if you look into like just like the history of art, how he did things, like kind of used like the globs and like broke down the painting so it wasn't all smooth lines. Mm-hmm. A lot of people say that's like the beginning of that deconstructionist art. And like I think very much, because you mentioned deconstructionism and how he was doing faith, I think it just makes a lot of sense that was also a little bit present in his art, even if he wasn't a deconstructionalist, Mm-hmm. But Yeah, that's where I see.
Yeah.
Where do you see? Sorry.
No, I think there's plenty of maturity that you can see through his, like you said, deconstruction through his spirituality that he represented in his paintings. And like you were saying with the night sky, I got this thing up. It says that the stars often represented the afterlife, eternity, or the divine. Like you were talking about, he found solace in the night, writing that death might be like going into a star. I really like this line that they had at Eternity's Gate, where it says, "When facing a flat landscape, I see nothing but eternity, and I am the only one to see it. Existence can't be without reason." I just think there's so much like depth to all of this, even though like Gauguin was routinely so tough on him for having this like childlike painting style where it looked like it was clay on canvas. But when you start like, digging deeper into like the symbolism and the spirituality of it, there's a lot of depth with everything, and it really reflects on who Van Gogh actually was too. You forgot what the blue represented in it. I got this up here. It says blue represents God's presence in his paintings, and the yellow represents God's love. So when you get like the Starry Night,
That's
you
beautiful.
get that swirling of the yellows and blues. So that's basically God's presence and his love that are constantly swirling in this endless eternity void up there.
God, that's great.
Yeah, it's just so cool. And then you start trying to apply this, like you were talking about, like, do I apply this to all his paintings with all his color theory? And I'm sure, he went through a whole stage of maturity with his painting. And so I'm sure he didn't apply these kind of thoughts to all of his paintings, but definitely during a period of his life, you could probably see a lot of these kind of principles applied to his painting and to his style. So yeah, it's really cool to dig into all this.
Sorry, I was trying to look up the name of the one painting I really like. Let's see, I think it's the Cafe Terrace at Night is what I'm looking at. Is what I'm thinking of. And that's one where like, it's just a cafe. Like it's just like a street with a little cafe on it. Right. But to me, it just speaks so much volumes. Cause like, it's just like, it's supposed to be just a normal, ordinary picture of life. But what does Van Gogh see? You see the blues and the yellows contrasting together. And now hearing what you were talking about with the blue being God's presence. And I'm like, he really saw the divine amongst us, whether in nature or in his fellow man. But he still was challenging the church the whole time. And that's where I'm like, just something about whatever is going on in him resonates with me on a really deep level. And I think that's the power of art, right? Like sometimes I don't have the words for it, but I see these paintings and I'm like, okay, I resonate with that. I don't necessarily have words, but I see what you're doing there. I resonate,
Oh,
and
yeah.
I don't know, my soul needs that sometimes, where maybe it didn't change my mind or challenge me or anything, but just looking at a painting like that and knowing what he's trying to depict, even though I'm not an art critic, I don't really, I'm not an artist by any means, it still resonates with my soul in a way that just, I don't know, it just helps me. I feel like that's not a fancy, theological, it just helps. Yeah, it's fine.
So I wanted to kind of bring up, like, after his death, like, I think he only sold one painting through his whole life. I think that's what it was. And he didn't sell anything else until after his death. And even his brother didn't even receive didn't sell any of his paintings before he died. It was his widow that actually started reaping the success of Vincent van Gogh's art and the success of who he was as a person, who he was and what he created, what he gave to the world. But Gustav Mahler, so one of the greatest symphonists of the 20th century, said tradition is not the worship of ashes, but the preservation of fire. Flame and ash point to two different parts of an active chemical process. The flame is what is active and ongoing. Fire is often associated with love. It burns, it keeps us warm, and it lights up a room. Conversely, the ash is the monument or memorial of a fire that once was. It is what remains after the fire. Love can be unruly and not look the same today as it did yesterday. It can't be captured, tamed, or packaged into a 5-point plan for success. But ashes can tell a story, and we can learn something from them. So G.K. Chesterton, in his book Orthodoxy, said, "Tradition is the democracy of the dead. Tradition is giving the dead a say in influencing the present, not by submitting or ignoring it, but by being in conversation with it. Van Gogh's life story is full of ups and downs with rocky relationships and a declining mental state. So speaking of his ashes, how might his ashes instruct us over like the 130 years after his death? Like what impact has he made? How does that influence our lives and shape us?
So, I do another podcast, the Whole Church podcast. It's all like church unity. And I remember doing research at some point of like what people thought the church was, like how different people defined it. And early on, like church fathers had such interesting ideas. And I actually kind of do like some of Augustine's thought of there being like a visible and invisible church, right? And there being this like the church isn't necessarily just the people who all believe in Jesus that were together right now, but maybe it's also the people from the past. It's also the angels maybe, and the church being so much more than what we even with those who are like, big brain are like, oh, it's not the building, it's the people. It's even more than the people you're seeing, right? And that's where I love. And when I think of church unity, that's where I've come to where I really care about tradition. And I don't think tradition is this dogmatic thing that I always have to stand by, but I understand that like when I say church unity, when I'm living in faith, I'm living in community with those who've gone before us. And I don't think that's just the saints. I include Van Gogh. And when I look at how he struggled against the institutional church, and I see what a lot of the church in America is doing right now as an institution, and a lot of the church is supporting what's happening with ICE and Donald Trump right now, and I'm like, that is just evil. And I think of Van Gogh and how he has like the cafe I just talked about, and he sees his fellow man with the blue and the yellow and God's presence and hope shining through. I don't see that in the people who are saying, yeah, let's support ICE. Let's get these people kicked out of our country. We don't need to treat them well at all. And I don't know, there's a certain darkness about it, like the church sitting there in the Starry Night picture, right? And I'm like, I resonate. I like where he was at. I want to do more. I like what he did. I think his painting spoke volumes. It gives us a point of resonance. I want to do more though. And I don't know what that looks like all the time. And it's struggle for me. So as a Taoist Christian, I follow these ideas of Taoism of like waiting for the mud to settle, doing this in action, that wu wei. But I'm like, that's hard when I see so much wickedness in our world. And sometimes it makes it hard to see God's presence amongst my fellow man. And I think that's where Van Gogh challenges me. Is he saw that amongst his fellow man. He saw that the church was dark, but he still saw nature in his fellow man. There was the light of God right in our midst. And trying to still see that today can be challenging. So I'm trying to find ways to do that better, to look for those moments better. So like the Super Bowl halftime show, we have Bad Bunny, and he's singing the song, say, "We are the Americas," and bringing everybody together. And I'm like, a little bit right there. I saw the presence of God there. Like I could see, maybe I can envision a Van Gogh painting of Bad Bunny with the blues and the yellow. So, I don't know what that would look like, but I'm like, something about that still resonates with me. And having looked to him who's gone before us, his ashes of, this is a man who saw God amongst us, and letting that challenge me as a fellow member of the church with Van Gogh and saying, what does it look like for me to also try to see that in a world where it's really hard to see that sometimes?
Yeah. I liked everything what you said. While you were talking, I kind of thought of Bonhoeffer in this question too. What the ashes of Bonhoeffer's life, tells us, and how also instructs us, from the grave, how we can approach Christianity and approach those that we see aren't really living out what we think that actually should look like. And then you also think of Van Gogh, and there are two totally different approaches to what they were seeing. Bonhoeffer, he witnessed this total just demonstrative version of Christianity that caused harm and expelled people and segregated people, murdered people, and was doing it all under the guise of God ordained. And so he approached it as very outspoken, very much a kind of resistance in a way, not the Eric Metaxas way, but he was outspoken, and he was, he saw him doing his part of trying to combat what he thought was very wrong and very rotten within the church. Then you contrast that with Vincent van Gogh, where he saw something very rotten within the church, and he distanced himself away from the institutionalized church. But he did it more in a way of finding God through nature and expressing it through art and very peaceful means in a way that was more like an individualistic resistance in a way, contrast to Bonhoeffer's, which is more outspoken. But I think what you're saying, like sometimes, you know, you see something wrong, but you don't really know how to address it. You don't really know what to do yourself. I think each of us are able to find a specific way to, you know, find that, I guess, lack of better word, resistance against, you know, wrongdoings and harm. And I'm sure that you would find your way of, you know, maybe how God is speaking to you as far as how to push back against a wrongdoing. But yeah, it's interesting to kind of look at his life, dig into it a little bit, see what it was all about, and even dig into his theology and more of kind of the spiritual side of things, and to see how he does that kind of thing. And of course, you know, what it did to him too. Of course, chewing on paintbrushes with lead probably didn't do very good for his mental state, but
not very helpful. Don't recommend.
But yeah, I think there's a way for all of us to find that way to not just be a passerby and to just accept what's going on.
Yeah. First, I want to plug real quick. Learning in Wartime by C.S. Lewis. Fantastic piece. You know, he also during World War II, talking about what's going on with Hitler, you know, Germany, everything that's happening, and saying that it's still important to pursue the arts, to learn. It is still important to do these things, even in times such as these. I think that's an incredible piece. So we're thinking about ashes that we're learning from. Lewis is definitely up there for me. I know you mentioned Bonhoeffer. I'm doing a series on another podcast. I'm on a lot of podcasts, guys. I'm sorry.
You're on
Be Living Water. Yeah, it's fine. I do Be Living Water, talking about like Taoist Christianity. Lately, I've been doing, kind of going back and forth with Daniel, the book of Daniel from the Bible, and the book of Victor Hugo's novel Les Miserables, right? First off, Victor Hugo and his relationship with Napoleon III very much is a good piece of like, what does it look like for a Christian to resist, right? He wrote satire pieces. He's constantly speaking up. He was exiled from his country, speaking up against Napoleon III. And yet when he writes novels like Les Miserables, the novel shows that the fighting didn't do anything. But the people who were compassionate, who were patient, who just loved their fellow man were the ones that were really making a difference. So sometimes I think those little actions are more important than the big ones, and I love seeing that in people like Victor Hugo's work. But you also see with Victor Hugo that like he wrote a satire called that I forget, like it was like a French name, but it was like Little Napoleon was the title of it. He's just making fun of him, and you're like, but didn't you just say like loving our neighbor is the way to go? And it's like, yeah, maybe a little bit of both is good. And you know, that we have plenty of people. That's the blessing of the church being so old. We got plenty of ashes to learn from.
Lots of ashes.
Yeah,
it's
great.
Some people
we
forget
should
that.
Have a day like Ash Wednesday, and we'll just celebrate all of it.
Ash Wednesday, but not in like the Easter. Yeah. You're talking about just like a Remembrance Day, like remember the ashes.
It's fine. Yeah, we'll have 2 Ash Wednesdays now.
There you go. That won't be confusing.
It's fine. No.
Well, do you want to talk about anything else? I know we both watched At Eternity's Gate. There was a lot of really great things in that film. I would recommend it to anybody to watch it.
Unfortunately.
You what now?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Oh, I was just saying I didn't get to finish it. Unfortunately, I started it this morning, and my internet sucks. No, my internet sucks, man. It stopped and Prime just would not load again, and I'm like, man, I still have to finish it later. So I don't think I quite got through half, but I watched as much as I could before my internet decided no more.
There's an excellent conversation between a priest. What's his name? The actor. It's a really well-known actor. He was in Casino Royale, that James Bond movie. He was in Hannibal TV series. I don't know if you know who I'm talking about, but anyways. I'm sure I'll think of it after we're done recording here. But he has this fantastic conversation with Vincent. So Vincent's in this institution, this mental institution, and this priest comes over, calls him over, and starts talking to him and just talking about. So he's asking questions like, "Do you feel angry sometimes?" And Vincent's like, "Yes." And they go on, and he's like, "Sometimes I go out and look at a blade of grass or a branch of a fig tree in order to calm down." He says, "Does it work?" "Yes." And so I feel God is nature, and nature is beauty. I've seen you in the garden. And the priest says, "I've seen you in the garden painting."
Hmm.
So it just goes on, and he starts talking about his faith a little bit, his spirituality, and the priest is confused. He's kind of like, I didn't expect to hear this from a painter, and he starts talking about how his father was a pastor. He starts talking about things, and he actually starts to make the priest a little uncomfortable because it starts saying things that are aside from like the orthodoxy of what the priest actually believes.
Yeah.
I don't have time to go through the entire conversation because it is pretty lengthy, but if you ever watch the movie, it is a great little conversation there. I mean, there's a lot of really great little portions of that movie. I did take a bunch of notes from all of this. Even just towards the end of the movie, like he goes to another institution, and this Dr. Gachet, he's talking with him and just talking about his ideology, how he sees the world, and it feels so deep. And I think a lot of the dialogue that they wrote into the film was pulled from some of these letters that he had by writing like Paul Gauguin and his brother Theo. But yeah, it's just beautiful. The whole film just encaptures this kind of like the emotional state of Vincent van Gogh, as well as the mental health issues that he had, and it just encapsulates this whole kind of vibe and feeling of Vincent van Gogh very well.
Yeah. And the casting is insane, man. Like
so
Oscar Isaac, William Dafoe. I'm like, it's so cool. I did listen to a podcast with the director, and he was saying like what they want to do with the film is make you feel like you're experiencing Van Gogh's life. Like you feel like you're the outcast, like all this stuff. And what I saw of it, I thought was really good. I'm excited to finish it once my internet decides to like me again. It's crazy. My internet can work for everything except for the one TV. So I think it's actually my TV that doesn't like me. But no, and I just, yeah. What I could tell of how they did that was incredible. I know I mentioned the Doctor Who one before too. And
Yes.
I think what I like too, because you were talking about how like Van Gogh saw the world differently, and that's what was cool about that episode. Is like, of course, it's Doctor Who, creature of the week. Van Gogh's the only one who can see it, and it's talking about just like how he sees the world differently, and it just does such an incredible commentary with that while doing the fun sci-fi adventure stuff. And then you have that scene at the end where the Doctor kind of breaks one of his own rules. He brings Van Gogh to the future and lets Van Gogh see a museum of his paintings of how like, hey, you weren't remembered in your time. Here's how you were remembered. And this is going to suck to some people, but what I really liked about it was he teared up. He had this incredibly emotional moment, but guess what? He still goes back and ends up taking his own life. And I think maybe we need to do a like trigger warning, something to suicide, but it's Van Gogh. I think people probably knew we were going to have to talk about it. I had a friend who I met him like a month after his dad had committed suicide, right? And just the struggle I saw him go through, because we were still in a more conservative church at the time, figuring out where did his dad spend eternity. We think of suicide as a sin, and it's like, well, how do you? And I think it just really helps of thinking of like mental health is a sickness. And I think regardless of your theological beliefs, I think it should be safe to say God does not judge people for disease. Unfortunately, disease is a part of the fall of man. And I personally do believe, and we see Van Gogh's life, even the worst of it, I think he truly had a heart after Jesus, right? Like he wanted to be like Jesus. And to me, that'll always be his legacy. It's tragic. Suicide's always tragic. But I hope my conservative brothers and sisters can see and relate and say, hey, yeah, God's not going to judge us for a disease. And those of us who don't have to worry about that stuff, I still think it's important that we acknowledge the mental health issues. But remember, that's not his legacy. His legacy is how he was the Christ of the coal mine, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's how I choose to remember him anyway.
Yeah, I actually really I think it's important that we talk about the mental health and that side of things. I know there is a little bit deviation as far as the story goes, as far as it depends on the scholar that follows go. I think it is widely assumed that he had shot himself, although there's a lot of mystery behind that itself. But there are two Van Gogh scholars that have proposed a different theory, and that's the one they choose in the film. I'm sorry, spoiler warning if you haven't seen the film yet and want to. But
yeah,
they basically show that he was murdered by two local boys, but that he pretended that he had shot himself as to keep them out of trouble. So he was basically, and I mean, even if you look at it that way, I mean, that really shows who he was. It's not that he was set out to enact, to get them to, have justice, delivered on these kids and revenge and everything like that. He wanted to protect these two boys and saw it as more of like like maybe even accident or a these boys were in a spot in their life where they might not have the maturity to understand what they're doing. And if you look at it through this lens, you can still see this beautiful side of Vincent van Gogh and this Christ in the coal mine look, what you're talking about. And it's like, whichever way you can look at the mental health side of it and understand the fragility of our human nature, or if you find this other lens of this theory about that he was murdered by two boys and how he reacted to them shooting him. I think there's a lot of layers of nuance that you can pull from either side of those stories too. So
yeah. And I think the story of maybe he was accidentally shot and then took the blame for it, like that story, it's one of those examples of like, we don't know if that's factual or not, but sometimes truth and fact are two different things. And I think it's true to his character that would have happened. You know what I mean? Like, even if that's not a fact that's exactly how it went down, we don't know, that is still true to who he was. So in a way, it's true regardless if it's factual, which maybe it was. In a way, I kind of hope it was, because that's beautiful.
Yeah. They talk about the difference of truth and fact in this book here. I mentioned that one to you. But contamination. Yeah. I talked about it several times on my podcast already.
Yeah, I still need to pick that up. I know you've mentioned that to me a few times. I had a food related thought during our conversation.
Yeah.
But I don't know if where you're at with this. If you wanted to dive into something else first, or
if you want to. I mean, I'm not in a huge rush to get off here.
Well, my food thought. So, because I mentioned earlier Deconstructionist art, which he was not, but he might have been one of the preludes to it. Maybe. I remember going to Epcot during the art festival that they do like February, March, and they had a deconstructionist theme the 1 year we went. I think this was during my honeymoon actually. And I had a deconstruction key lime pie. So they had like a swivel of pie, a little thing of like key lime on one side, and I think it was strawberry on the other. And you kind of like halved it. And I was like, it was beautiful. You had the contrast of the red and the green there. And I'm thinking of like, what was the Van Gogh version? Also, mind you, my favorite desserts are all blueberry. So I'm like, what if it was like a blueberry pie? So you have that like swivel of pie in the middle and blueberry on one side and lemon on the other. So you have that blue and yellow. And I'm like, that'd be kind of cool. Like I kind of want to try that. Mm-hmm. So maybe I'll learn how to do, because I don't know how to do the pie swivel. I think that would be the hardest thing for me to recreate. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that was a random food thought.
Yeah. No, I'm thinking like cupcakes. I mean, you could easily do like the swirls and whatnot.
Oh yeah.
But I'm trying to think of like a savory dish, like a savory dish.
Yeah.
Maybe you could use like squid ink or get some sort of like blue dye, like a squid ink to make a blue pasta or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then kind of swirl that in with like the natural yellow of the wheat pastas. I think that'd be kind of a cool little thing. Maybe get like an olive oil sauce with it, swirl it around in your plate it all nice and pretty like that. Maybe like a meatball for the church or something like that. But
hey, I love it. I was thinking for the main course, since you started talking about it, because sometimes if you do, I'm from Tennessee, I'm a big believer that barbecue should be tomato based. Carolinas are just wrong. I live in the Carolinas, they're wrong. I'm sorry, barbecue should be tomato based. But if you get a tomato base that has like a lot of like Tabasco or like hot sauce in it, ends up with like a really kind of almost like a bright red looking color. Mm-hmm. Almost, not quite, but I think you could do something like that. Have like a couple of ribs, have greens with it, and then maybe like a corn dish, a cream corn or something with it. So then you kind of get the red, yellow, green all together there. Van Gogh would probably, I think he'd like that. He'd appreciate it. Yeah. like Van Gogh, I need, that's what I want to ask his ashes. If they could respond, I want to know if he was in culinary arts, what his dish would look like. Because I'm always thinking about food, unfortunately.
Transgressing from one art style to another, usually artists can find some other art style that they can kind of, transfer into. Like me, I started out with doing photography, graphic arts. I eventually went into, I started, painting and whatnot. That went into graphic arts, into photography, now into video. So, transgressing into that. And I also apply a lot of this stuff into food as well. So I think Van Gogh would probably be able to jump into cooking. And I'm sure he cooked at least a little bit during his life.
French food is so good. Good. French food's, yeah, man. Yeah. So maybe I'll let you know if I ever try to make any of these. I'll send you a picture and let you know.
Please, and I'll do the same thing too.
Yes. Yeah. I love, I don't know what it is. I love a well-plated dish. I'm like, beautiful.
So good.
Yeah. Because I'm not musically talented and I like art that I can engage. So that's my only alternative. It's the culinary. Yeah.
Well, Joshua, maybe we'll just call this an end to this. I do want to ask you though, in case anybody wants to find out where you're at. Like you said, you're on all the podcasts and your little community that you have. Where can people find you? Just seriously throw everything at the wall and let people find out where you're at.
Yeah, I will say somehow Christian Ashley is on more podcasts than me, and I don't know how he does it. So shout out, Christian. We love you. So all of my podcasts are on the Unazal Podcast Network. So if you guys go to that website, you could find all of them. But I am one of the hosts of the Whole Church Podcast with TJ Blackwell. I am the only host of Be Living Water. And then I'm one of like 15 hosts of Systematic Ecology. I also do some of the voice work for the Bible After Hours. All of that's on the Unazal Podcast Network. I have neglected for a long time my Substack, The Kingdom Key, but I have some stuff in the works that I have like 3 different things that I'm like, it just doesn't feel done to me, so I just haven't published them. So
right
I don't know, maybe one day it'll feel like they're done and I'll put them up, but maybe not. We'll see.
There you go.
Yeah.
Whenever you have time, aside from all your other projects.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, exactly.
Well, Joshua, thanks again for coming on for this.
Thank you so much for inviting me, man. I love this.
Yeah. And talking about Van Gogh, I mean, this is just such a fun topic to kind of dig into, and I would never have thought about digging deeper into him if you hadn't brought it up. So thank you for doing that. And we'll look for something else to come on. If we want to talk about Latveria and, get on Marvel again or something like that, we can do that for sure. So
yeah, we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
I want to do something food related again next time. We got to like alternate.
Oh yeah, maybe we'll do like a Marvel food or something like that. We'll figure out some sort of food thing to do.
Yeah. But man, thank you so much. I am just so thankful that you took the time to get into Van Gogh with me, because I just wanted a conversation partner, and I know that you really put a lot of time into it, and I just appreciate you, man, and your heart and just where you're at, and this show and everyone who listens to it. I appreciate all of it.
Thanks, man. All right, well, we'll talk again soon.
Yes, sir. All right, till next time.